Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we'll be talking basketball, New Orleans Pelicans basketball. We've got a great panel to break it down for you. Jude Young of WGSO Radio and Oleh Kosel of the Bird Rights are both on our panel tonight. And gentlemen, let's get started. Talk a little bit about what's going on with the Pels. But before we do, we always let the audience know a little bit about what you guys are involved in. Jude, you know the deal. Why don't you take it first?
First of all, you missed a golden opportunity. You should have said tonight we're talking about and pointed to your tie because I feel completely left out.
My daughter gave me that tie.
We are talking about the Pelicans tonight, and we talk about a lot of topics sports-wise on WGSO. I do in the evenings on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights from 6 to 7 p.m. The Jude Young Show, also available on WGSO.com, and I am also part of a project that's going to bring back a site that covers all local sports with a special focus on high school sports. If you know Ken Trahan and I and our work, then you know what I'm talking about. So next month, look for it. We'll have more. I'm at Jude Young on Twitter, and I'll have some information coming out soon about that.
And one of the best sites that covers the Pelicans, the Bird Rights. Oleh, tell us about it.
Yeah, unlike Jude, we just exclusively focus on basketball, particularly the Pelicans. And this is our, Christmas time of the year. We were especially coming off a disappointing season. So we're going to be giving you everything about the draft we just did and free agency, which, we're still in the midst of. So keep following us along at The Bird Rights. And you can also follow us along on Twitter and Facebook under the same name. That's one word, The Bird Rights.
Well, I guess we were going to start talking Pelicans. We start off with the free agency period, which started off with Drew Holiday signing a 5-year, I'm going to take a big gulp here, $126 million contract. An average of about $25 million per year, could go to $30 million per year if it comes down to him reaching some incentive clauses within the contract. Guys, I'll just start off by saying we had this discussion a while back, and I thought the $16.9 million cap hold was a little bit of overpayment. Then you look at, again, some of the contracts that were given out during free agency. Then I was thinking 16 to 18 million is probably palatable for a guy like Drew Holiday. But to me, when you start talking about the monopoly money of the NBA, $25 million is an outrageous overpayment on the part of the Pelicans, in my opinion. And look, you can't look at this deal alone. I think that you have to look at a culmination of sins when it has to do with the salary cap on why the Pelicans were in the position they're in now, where they were forced to be able to overpay for Drew Holiday to keep him here because of the salary cap constraints they had on them because of, again, the deals that they had made in the past, maybe overpayment of players, some bad deals, maybe not holding on to lottery picks, the chosen path that Dell Demps has sent this team on. So, again, this is a team that is not willing to pay the luxury tax, and when you have arguably two max players and a guy like DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis, now throwing a third in there, Drew Holiday, wow, you've really got to be fiscally responsible with that cap. And again, when you look at Dell Demps, in a lot of cases, he's kind of shortcutted the system. I mean, not wanting to deal with again, lottery picks, trading those, relying on the D-League in a lot of cases to supplement the roster instead of draft choice, going to the Euro leagues and maybe grabbing players. But, now you're in a situation where you're looking at this roster right now, and I know it's an incomplete as far as that goes, but wow, it's just, if you're a Pelican fan, you're kind of wondering, hey, what the heck's going on Airline Drive? I'll take you first. Jude, your thoughts on the contract that Drew Holiday signed?
Well, we were talking about this before the show because you've hit right to the heart of the matter. Trying to determine whether this contract was right has to do with separating the past from the present. Let's just pretend that Dell Demps isn't the general manager right now, and a new general manager came in. I know some people are probably taking the confetti out right now.
I was going to reach for it right now. We have some champagne in the back. Could y'all bring the champagne out?
But it is indeed Dell Demps, but let's pretend it was somebody else. And that somebody else, the GM of the Pelicans, was told, here's our situation, here are the contracts in the roster that you have inherited. Now, make a decision on Drew Holiday knowing that we better get to the playoffs this year or we're not going to be able to re-sign DeMarcus Cousins. As much as of a good relationship so far over the space of basically 5 months that we've built with him since he joined the organization, we still need to win, or he can leave, and he probably will. If you're that GM, you're going to figure out a way to re-sign Drew Holiday knowing that a potential replacement for him, because of the cap hold situation, you can overpay Drew Holiday and still have a very good starting guard, or you can be empty-handed and still not get guys like Jeff Teague, who got $19 million per year and probably wouldn't have chose you. He wound up going with one of the options after the Jimmy Butler trade. It made sense to be going to a Minnesota. You're in that situation where you can't get those guys and you don't have an asset on hand to help you take in contracts over the cap, still be able to use your exceptions and sign and fill in a roster if you don't sign Holiday. And I think when we're hearing $170 million over 5 years floated out there for a while, you would not have been able to swallow that one, and a lot of people wouldn't have. But when it came down to it, for a young guard who's versatile, who we may not have seen the proper scheme yet for him to maximize his ability, fully healthy and hopefully playing for full seasons to come, Drew Holiday hasn't hit his ceiling yet, and he can be a guy who can be the type of asset that fits into the Twin Tower system that they're trying to put in place, a guy who can play both ways, defend, play off the ball, and play on the ball. In the pick and roll game with the two best bigs, I think, combination-wise in the league by far, there's a lot of potential there, and we haven't had them together long enough to see it. So that's the re-signing Holiday argument. And again, you have to separate the past because what's done is done. The present required Holiday to be part of this big three they've been trying to sell to us.
Not only what I love about your site, what I love about what you do is you peel the layers back. You give us information, again, that is not readily available to the average fan out there. Give us your perspective on the Drew Holiday signing.
Yeah, what Jude touched on is pretty much common knowledge among Pelicans fans. They were kind of, stuck in where they had to re-sign him. Their options otherwise were limited. They couldn't have gotten that Jeff Teague or George Hill because they simply didn't have the cap space for it. Or they would have had a very limited roster by jettisoning a lot of players. So that was an option. But the way I'm looking at this and how I'm going to try and sell you today, Eric, is two things. First of all, you have to look at Drew Holiday's age. If you're going to be throwing out that type of big money, it's really key to look at how old he's going to be towards the end of his contract, which is going to be 32. Guess what? Kyle Lowry and George Hill, they're both 31. And they were looking for max contracts. Can you imagine if the Pelicans were trying to bring them in? There's no way those guys would have given a discount to come to New Orleans, like say a 2 or 3 year deal. It would have been about a 4 or 5 year deal. And we would have seen him be, 35, 36 years old? No, sorry. Those aren't the kind of horses you want to attach, the Pelicans' card to. The other big point I want to mention, too, is you focus a lot, and we should, on what Drew Holiday's lately done here in the city. And last year, he had a very disappointing season.
Yes.
I touched on this immediately right after the season concluded. And let's face it, Drew Holiday wasn't himself. If you watched him the year before, he was on the verge of being a top 10 point guard, and that is with restrictions. He was playing, I want to say he could play another additional 1,000 minutes on that 2015-16 season. And if he had, he would have easily had all the advanced stats would have, pointed him top 10 player. Here we go. What happened last year, I surmise, is truly you have to take into consideration his family. He had to be at home with his wife. And that, from what I've heard, weighed heavily on him. And kind of showed there's a few markers I noticed. For instance, his free throw percentage last year. This guy's an 80% free throw shooter. He barely cracked 70%. And then what was it? Oh, he had a couple bad, miserable months where one month I think he averaged like 5 turnovers. And then he had 2 months where he barely, eclipsed 20% from three-point range. And I remember David Wesley clearly, he mentioned Drew Holiday doesn't look right in a game like in December. And he even made remark that Drew came up to me asking me for pointers. He had no confidence. Drew was not the player that we saw 2 years ago. I think that's what the Pelicans are banking on. They're banking on, get this guy's head right this offseason. His family stable, a little bit more stable. I don't know exactly how Lauren's doing, but knock on wood, she's doing better. I know she's still going through recovery, but that's the route I think the Pelicans are looking at. They think they're going to get a Drew Holiday from 2 years ago, and that's what they signed.
Well, break the contract down for us if you would.
It's, sure. The contract is for 5 years, and it's about $127 million, and that's without the incentives, which there's a lot of, and deservedly so, considering his injury history. Now, it's going to start at just about 21 and a half or so this coming season, and it's going to progressively increase every year with 8% raises. That's what's in the new CBA. So they're locked in this high amount, but it's still, just under what Anthony Davis is making. And consider this, he could have been making $30 million next year, or just under $30 million. So, there's some wiggle room that the Pelicans actually got away with, I think.
When you say he, you mean Drew Holiday?
Drew Holiday, correct. Yeah.
Now, again, this also kind of falls in line with, the Anthony Davis not making those all-star teams, which, again, prevented him from, the Supermax contract, right? Right.
Yeah.
But yet, that's the Derrick Rose provision?
Exactly, the 30% Derrick Rose.
And then on top of that, by design, the Pelicans structured the contract so Drew Holiday would not be making more than Anthony Davis?
Yeah, it's more of a look thing. They really didn't want to pay him more than Anthony Davis next year. He's a superstar. He's the All-NBA player. It wasn't going to look right. And then, as you mentioned, Eric, DeMarcus Cousins is coming up on the books, and it's going to take the max to re-sign him too.
Right. Again, you took the pro on this. What are your thoughts on how he's going to fit in next year? Again, a guy that has been a point guard throughout his entire career has now been asked to play more of an off guard with maybe Boogie Cousins taking on more of a point forward type role, a point center type role. What do you think? How do you think he fits in after he had as much trouble as he had last season in trying to assume this new role?
Well, assuming, and the great points made about how difficult last season was for Holiday and the fact that he was coming off of a season where finally getting back to health, he still wasn't playing a full-time role and not being able to be himself in back-to-back situations, which are important in the NBA. So taking all that into account, let's assume he's fully healthy and ready to be able to be a difference maker. He does have the ability to play off the ball, and being able to do that means if you're increasing his minutes, you're also able to get the best out of him defensively. We heard what a good defender he is, and we saw him last year really struggle. Hey, it's one thing to struggle against the Russell Westbrooks of the world. Now, I remember in a couple of matchups, he just could not keep up, and you're right, it didn't look like the Holiday we had seen earlier. I think you're going to get a better defender out of him that you can match up on the other end of the floor, and that's going to be extremely important because you're going to have to be able to deal with teams defensively in transition in the modern NBA. And if you're built around two big men, hey, they can help you a lot if they clear the defensive boards to help you run, but they're going to have issues over the long haul with other teams trying to run and wear them out. A Holiday can match up defensively at his best and help you in that area. That these other guards that we've talked about, I didn't mention George Hill, and he did. These guys don't have that kind of pedigree, so he's going to be able to fit in. He's a pretty good spot-up shooter, and I think the key is the addition of assistant coach Chris Finch. We're waiting to see what that new system gives as far as new looks, and we're going to see some of that in Summer League, so I advise everybody that wants to get an idea of how the Pelicans are going to play, watch the Summer League and pay more attention not to the bigs, but these wings and a couple of them that are young shooters that could be guys that become value selections for the roster at the end of October when they go into the regular season, because they've got to have guys with length that are decently athletic and can knock down open shots. It's all going to revolve around two big men that you're hoping defensively the other team has to collapse to deal with them, and then it's guys like Holiday and many others who are going to have to knock down shots. I think he's capable of doing that from what I've seen.
Ali, jump on that if you will.
Absolutely. I agree. The Chris Finch signing is a boon. Drew Holiday is not the type of Russell Westbrook isolation. I'm going to break you down and create offense. No, he works a lot better in a system as to where he doesn't have to have all that weight placed on his shoulders. That's what I'm looking for next year. Supposedly Chris Finch is going to take the ball and Alvin Gentry out of his hands quite a bit. That's where they're going to put him on the wing. They hope to sign another guard. That's part one. The other part is they're going to have DeMarcus Cousins out in the perimeter a lot, just like Nikola Jokic out in Denver. They were amazing. They were a top 3 offense for most of the year, and I think after December 1st, the number 1 offense. And it all revolved around Jokic sitting at the top of the perimeter, top of the key. They had, for point guards, Jameer Nelson, Jamal Murray, who's a rookie, and Emmanuel Mudiay, who can't shoot a lick. And they made it work. If DeMarcus Cousins can do even half of what Jokic did, it's going to be incredible. As long as our Pelicans, Dante Cunningham, whoever's on the wings, they do the cuts, Drew Holiday, little ball movement. We saw last year when those two guys were playing together, everybody just stood around the perimeter waiting for something to happen. Chris Finch is going to do just the opposite. He's going to have everybody in the move, just like Golden State Warriors, just like the Denver Nuggets. That's what I'm going to be looking for.
So 2-3 years down the line here, as again Anthony Davis is looking at a possible extension. By that time, you would think DeMarcus Cousins is going to sign a long-term 5-year deal. He'll be in the midst of his deal. Will there be buyer's remorse on this contract with Drew Holiday, in your opinion?
There could be, but I will say one thing, Eric. I don't expect DeMarcus to sign a full 5-year max contract. The reason being is he's going to be up for a 10-year deal, he'll have 10 years of experience in the league, so he'll be able to sign a max deal, a super max, paying him 35% of the cap in 2 years' time. So I'm looking for him to sign a 2-year plus an option on a 3rd-year deal next summer, if it all works out.
So him and Davis would be ending their contracts about the same time.
That's the key, yeah. So if everything works out, those guys will re-sign. If not, we'll be stuck with Drew Holiday.
Right.
And that goes back to why you had to sign Drew Holiday, because if you can get Cousins to sign that deal, that suddenly gives you multiple seasons to work with off of what should be progress. That has to be the goal, incremental progress, because right now, you look at how powerful the Western Conference is. 45 wins could get you the 6th seed. It may not just get you in, because remember, 45 wins got you in as the 8th seed 2 years ago when you're the Pelicans. You could be a decent seed where you're not playing what looks like the 2 monsters, the Warriors, and when the Rockets get done, now since they have Chris Paul, they may add Carmelo Anthony, they could be the contender there. It's going to come down to more than likely those two to determine who wins the West and probably wins the NBA title. You're trying to be amongst the rest of those other teams and become an attractive destination, and that's going to be something that Drew Holiday has to play a key role in. And I think Cousins has shown here in the offseason so far, the magic of social media. Seeing him in great shape, working hard on the 4th of July with Anthony Davis in the gym, that has to be the most encouraging sign of the entire offseason, because you could see Cousins during the season. When he first got here, I never really paid attention to him. First thing I said is, that doesn't look like a guy who's in the type of shape that a superstar should have. And I think he figured that out and now sees a situation with Anthony Davis where he has hope, because it was pretty hopeless in Sacramento.
Just to be fair a little bit to DeMarcus, he did have an Achilles injury. Supposedly it was bothering him. That's why he barely played in the All-Star game. So the Pelicans basically got a guy that was out of shape who was injured. So,
guys, I talked about this over the last couple of days. When you're looking at 3 guys that are either max or near max deals, you're talking about the possibility down the line of maybe DeMarcus Cousins signing a max deal. If Anthony Davis is going to sign, he's going to sign a max deal. How does this team, when you start looking at right now, the salary cap kind of stagnant? It looks like maybe the balloon has to burst at some point. How can this team coexist with the rest of the NBA with 3 guys that are being getting a near max deal or max deals without being a taxpayer?
The biggest thing is they're going to have to prove it on the court. They're going to have to win games to get veterans, to get players to accept smaller contracts to come in here. Second thing is Dell Demps is going to have to start reserving some of our future assets and turning that young talent into cheap young talent on the bench as productive. Those are the only 2 methods by which this plan is going to work. I mean, as you said, Eric, they're going to combine for, conceivably in 2 to 3 years' time, $90 million minimum.
Yeah.
And with
right now the cap's 99.
In a couple years the cap is expected to be at about only 108, 110.
Right.
So
how do you put a team together?
Well, just the way I said it. You're going to have to use a lot of your exceptions. They're going to be hovering around the tax. Maybe, I don't know. I've heard that Tom Benson may go over the luxury tax if it's a winner on the court. Now, but history doesn't say so, because I think I just read this quote somewhere on Twitter the other day. Only 3 teams have never gone over the luxury tax. we're one of them.
Yeah, which again, we're a small market team.
Right.
Again, that's part of the bottom line in terms of when he's looking at the money that's coming in, getting money from other teams in terms of them paying the luxury tax. For those that don't understand the luxury tax threshold, explain where the Pelicans are now and where they would have to be be a quote-unquote taxpayer, and what it would cost them to go over for every dollar that they're over the luxury tax threshold.
Yeah, sure. We're currently at, the Pelicans are at 108.5 once they sign Drew Holiday officially. And so they'll have up to about 119. That's where the luxury tax line sits. So even though they've got a couple more exceptions that can bring back Dante Cunningham on his bird rights, they can't do all the above simply because they don't have enough space. Or if they choose to, they can go over, but as you mentioned, there's going to be a penalty. Now how it works is once you go over the luxury tax line, you're going to be penalized for, it's not a repeater because they'll be a first time going above luxury tax, but it'll be times and a half. So they'll have to pay at the end of the year, whatever figure they're over, pay the league office double that sum.
Right. And I don't see that happening in New Orleans, although it's something I've talked about over the last couple of days. If you're going to have three guys that are going to be making that much money against the cap, it may be something, if you're winning, you have to consider.
Right. It's not going to happen right now because it makes no financial sense versus what the improvement of the product could possibly be, who's available to get you to that point. But in the future, it may, because the things that we won't know officially, how much money they're going to wind up making on their TV contract if it's a better product, how much money they're going to be making at the turnstiles, suite sales if it's a better product. Because if this becomes an event to see the Pelicans, it hasn't been, then the organization's going to make more money.
Like it was when the Hornets first came to town.
And we've seen Tom Benson on the Saints side of things too be willing to spend more money. People lament how much dead cap money the Saints had to deal with in recent years, but that just goes to show you that they're willing to pay to try to get the product to win when they felt like, hey, we have the stars in place. It's a Drew Brees team, so that gives you the hope that if you have a decent team, you might be able to win it all. Well, now if Cousins and Davis provide that hope that this is a Twin Towers team that's really legitimate in the NBA, I have no doubt that the Benson family will spend money. So they have to get to that point first. Right now, they don't want to get themselves in a situation where they're paying the luxury tax. They may want to do that next year when they take that next step, assuming they make the playoffs and Cousins stays.
Let's talk about the exceptions, because a lot of people don't understand how these exceptions work. How much is the mid-level exception? Do they have that? The biannual exception, and then the trade exceptions. Kind of get into that if you would, Ollie.
Sure. The Pelicans have all the exceptions available to them. The MLE, that's $8.4 million starting next season. The biannual, which you mentioned, is $3.2. And then they've got a couple of trade exceptions they earned from the Buddy Hield and Tim Frazier trades.
And what is a trade exception?
Trade exception is where you send out a player and you don't get any kind of salary coming back. So in essence, you earn a trade exception as to where you can absorb somebody else's contract for the same figure or less. It can be combined with anything. So in other words, the Pelicans have a $3.5 million, roughly, so to speak, chip that they can go around on any contract and pluck that player onto their roster if a team so chooses to trade it to them. Or Tim Frazier's, I forget what his was, like $2.2 million, something like that. Yeah. So that's how a trade exception works, and they could utilize that.
Right. How about the biannual?
The biannual is about $3.2 million, and it can only be signed for 2 years. So you're kind of looking at the lesser role players with something like that. For instance, my favorite target is Vince Carter. I want to see some more veteran presence on the team. Okay. And then at the mid-level, that is their big ticket item. I think that's what they tried to sell Nick Young on. Right. As to where that can be up for 4 years. So starting at 8.4, and it can go up to, if you wanted to max out whoever you're going to pay the full MLE, it would go up to about $36 million. Now, I don't think the Pelicans are thinking that way. They don't want to sign anybody. As we've touched on, we've got 3 big contracts. Right. This player has to be overwhelming to even sniff that money. So that's why I think Nick Young ended up going to the Golden State Warriors. The Pelicans weren't offering anywhere close to the full MLE money.
Right, and you can split those exceptions,
Absolutely, sorry. Yeah, the MLE can be split, the biannual can be split.
Right,
yeah.
it can be split.
Yeah.
So over 2 players or so?
That's not the trade exception.
Not the trade exception.
They have to stand alone, yeah. I'm sorry.
No.
Trade exceptions can be actually. How it works is if you get a player that's worth less than a trade exception, you still have the remainder amount. But usually those remainders aren't worth anything to bring in another player. That's
so
why
all those are still on the table for Dell Demps to utilize to be able to bring in talent on this team right now.
That's right. And he can also, we've still got 3 unguaranteed contracts on the team that will become guaranteed. And there's Dante Cunningham's full bird rights that he can bring in on to go, to resign him over the cap without using any of those exceptions.
Darius Miller was brought in on a free agent contract, former second-round pick of the Pelicans, went to the to the EuroLeague, led the German pro team Brazo Bramberg to a third straight BICO BBL championship. In 2016, he was the finals MVP. Pedestrian numbers, though. 12 points a game, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. He shot 58% from 3. First of all, I'll take you first. I like Darius Miller coming out of Kentucky. I really did. I thought he was a steal in the second round. He just didn't seem to have what it took to be able to be a consistent scorer in the NBA. I thought he would be a nice 3-and-D player for them. It didn't happen. Maybe he needed to get to Europe to maybe bring his game up. What are your thoughts about Miller coming in, and can he be an impact player for this team?
I don't know about impact player, but I think what he needed to do was get away from the NBA, going from Kentucky to the NBA and being a role player at the highest levels of the game for so many years. He really needed to be more assertive, and at least there's some video of him online that you can see. He's a different kind of player looking for a shot, coming off of screens in transition, and that's something he needs to be willing to do and able to do in spurts to be able to help as part of the rotation if he wants to make it. Now, I'm pretty sure that he didn't get, or we haven't heard official word, obviously, but I'm pretty sure his contract's not going to be guaranteed. He's going to have to prove it in October in the preseason. But that's the type of guy you have to take a chance on to see if he fits your system. And he's somebody that, oh, by the way, I mentioned that Kentucky thing, Cousins, Davis. You keep your stars happy, giving a friend a chance. There's no risk at all with this Miller deal. And the great thing about him is he has proven in the past, and apparently in Europe, being asked to do more, always being a good, willing, sharing teammate. And that's the type of role players they need right now.
No, Ali, I'm always leery of the European leagues. There's so many different leagues in Europe. You don't know the quality of the league they're in. You don't know the quality of the team they're on. Again, your thoughts on Darius Miller?
Yeah, my initial thoughts weren't all that impressed by hearing the news. Put it bluntly, Darius Miller was already almost 4 or 5 year senior coming out of Kentucky.
He was.
So he had a lot of experience under his belt coming in the NBA. And for 2-3 years, he didn't even show any kind of improvement. That's key. And history also shows us that when you look at a player's statistics, if they're not providing in rebounding, assists, steals, all the type of raw common data, if they're just not providing, it's never going to happen for them. So therefore, that's why, and to go further to that point, he didn't do anything that much in the Bundesliga either. You touched on some good numbers, but if you combine everything as a whole, all his numbers, whether it's league, tournament, you combine all his production over there over the last 2 years, it's very similar numbers to what we saw as the Pelicans.
Really?
So as a step down league, I don't know.
Yeah.
He's going to provide that shooting. Now, granted, let's look on the other side. He is a long-range great bomber. That is exactly what the Pelicans need. They need guys that are going to be assertive, which you said that he kind of now looks like, and from what I've heard, he is. He looks for his shot. That's why he won an MVP over there. He's become kind of that player. Will he do that over here in the NBA, staying next to Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins? We'll see. But there's a chance that'll work. The other thing that kind of gives me hope about this signing is the fact that Dell Demps may be scouring the trade market. In other words, there's a good chance all the fans that fell in love with Jordan Crawford and have maybe hope for Quinn Cook, there's a good chance those contracts may be traded away because they're unguaranteed. Some team is going to want to take those contracts, just like how Houston did with Chris Paul. They needed to find a bunch of unguaranteed contracts. Why? To bring in Chris Paul, as for other teams wouldn't be burdened with any kind of additional salary. That is what Dell Demps may be trying to do. Therefore, that's why he brought Darius Miller. We may not be able to rely on Jordan Crawford, even though he's a great contract. Quinn Cook's got some, good pedigree going. We may not be able to rely on him either. So therefore, I think that's partially a reason why Miller's here.
So before I go back to you, do you believe that those players that will be moved in a deal, or they will be here when the season starts?
I think there's if Dell Demps, who I've heard is looking to make a deal, if there's one that's going to be had, those unguaranteed contracts, at least 2 of them are going to be, traded away in a package.
Right. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to look at the starting lineup. Now, you have to be more than just your starting lineup, unless you're the Golden State Warriors, and they happen to be more than their starting lineup. Again, they're the exception. When you look at the Pelicans, who's the starter you'd like to see them replace the most if they had to play a game today? I mean, Etuan Moore's a good basketball player, but he's a good backup. You would like to improve there at the other guard spot, and there goes with Drew Holiday's versatility. It can be a guy who's more of a point guard. It can be a guy who plays more off the ball. It can be a combo guard. You have those those options, so that flexibility is there. So I think that's the area they're going to look to try to attack. And if these non-guaranteed contracts help, then you have to let go of those two promising guards, because I'm a little bit excited about what Cook could bring to the table. And I think Crawford's one of those guys that Pelicans fans in their hopes and dreams, if Miller stays, hope that Miller can be that. Going away for a while and having to take the tough road made him improve his game in key areas. I will say one more thing about Miller. One real positive as far as the numbers. Apparently across Europe, I saw a stat that said that he is an elite catch and shoot guy by European basketball standards, and that league is built around that skill set.
That is true.
So you're not getting a guy who can't do the biggest thing you have to do in the NBA to be a role player nowadays. If you have some length, he has it. You got to be able to shoot the basketball, and like he mentioned, he's got a bit of a Bombers mentality and now a little bit more confidence to go with it.
Let's hold it right there. Let's take a quick break. You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Oleh, Kosel of the Bird Rights. Jude Young of WGSO Radio are our guests. We'll be right back.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or AmcoFenceCompany.com.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. We're talking Pelican basketball tonight. We'll be going to the phone lines at with about 15 minutes left in the show. Our guest tonight, Oleh Kosel of the Bird Rights, and also Jude Young of WGSO Radio. All right, Oleh, I'm going to take you first on this one. Possible trades that may be out there that, again, with the limited amount of cap space this team has, with, again, some guys that may be a little bit overpaid, that may ultimately be moved. Talk about some of the things you're hearing, as you put your ear to the ground on what's going on with the Pelicans.
Yeah, what you want to do is you want to pay attention to all the teams that are not going to be competing next year. The Phoenix Suns, they announced that they're pulling themselves out of the free agency race because they're not going to be signing any big names. They're looking out just for the future. And then there's the Atlanta Hawks and the Brooklyn Nets. The reason I mention these three teams is because I'm focused on three players. Eric Bledsoe with the Phoenix Suns. He's supposedly up for grabs. He's been up for grabs for over a year from Phoenix, but yet they haven't found any takers. Now, whether it's their asking price is too high, we don't know. I'm assuming since they announced anybody can have him at the highest bid, it's going to take a lot to get him. So therefore, you got to look elsewhere. I'm looking at Jeremy Lin from the Brooklyn Nets. This guy is somebody that Dell Demps wanted a year ago, but the Pelicans were outbid by the Brooklyn Nets in free agency simply because Brooklyn was able to offer him a starting position. That was really big for him. But now Dell Demps has an opportunity, I think, to bring him in because the Brooklyn Nets suddenly traded for D'Angelo Russell. So they don't technically need Jeremy Lin anymore to go ahead and lead that team. They're looking for the future. Obviously, Brook Lopez, he's now a Laker. So that the Nets are a complete rebuild team. Last target I'm looking at is Kent Bazemore from the Atlanta Hawks. He's another one that Dell Demps supposedly was rumored in being interested in. And there's a chance that he could be let go too. I don't think they're that high on him anymore. He's coming off a really rough year. It's the first year of his $70 million deal. He had kind of a really down season, so the chances are he's probably attainable too.
What are your thoughts on those three names?
And I think those three names point out the flexibility and how important that is as far as being able to go out there having Holiday. Bazemore is going to play off the ball. The other two, Lin and Bledsoe, certainly are most effective with the ball in their hands. They're point guards. So bringing them in and knowing that Holiday can adjust either way helps you to be able to just try to get the best deal and improve your overall talent level. So those three make a lot of sense. Normally it is a situation with teams that aren't going to be able to win. Either they haven't or they're not going to be able to win anymore, like the Hawks have made a decision that, hey, look, we peaked and we got to start over. Another team to bring up is the Boston Celtics, because once they work out whatever sign and trade they're working on with Gordon Hayward with Utah, that's probably going to involve Jay Crowder, who is somebody that would really fit in well here. He's an asset, but Danny Ainge, the GM there, has collected so many assets that he's got guys like a Marcus Smart, who really plays well on the ball, and an Avery Bradley, who would make a very good combo with Holiday as a defensive, versatile guard backcourt. Those are a couple of guys that a lot of teams are going to covet, that aren't overpaid, that are assets, that if Dell Demps goes out there in the market and is willing to give first rounders, and we know Dell Demps loves to do that for young veterans, these are the type of guys that he might target too. And we know the Celtics are a contender, but they almost have too much talent. Since the Pelicans don't have enough, let's make a deal.
Talk about the Celtic trifecta, those three guys.
Yeah, as Jude touched on, those are three very enviable guys around the league. Marcus Smart, he's on a very good rookie contract still. Problem is, you're going to have to pay him big money. And he's the guy I like the least of the trio. Right. Now, granted, he's young, he's still got a lot of potential, but in his 3 years, he has not shown an ability to shoot the ball well yet. And he makes questionable decisions still. So I'm looking more at the other two guys. Avery Bradley, which you touched on, which I think would be perfect for this roster. Next to Drew Holiday, absolutely perfect. Another Bulldog mentality, a defender, great shooter. So, and then there's Jay Crowder, who I don't know of any person that's ever said a bad thing about Jay Crowder. He's the type of guy you want in your locker room. He goes to fight. He won't back down, as we noticed in the playoffs. You name it. This guy's a battler.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Guys, possible free agents that are still available, that are within the salary cap realm that the Pelicans can handle, bringing those guys in. Ali, I'll take you first.
Yeah, I mentioned Vince Carter already, so I won't talk about him again. One of the guys, and I just wrote an article this morning on, was Ian Clark. He was with the Golden State Warriors last year, and it was kind of a breakout season for him. This guy, coming out of Belmont, was regarded as the best shooter in college back in 2013. But he became a journeyman. Why? His size. He's 6'3". He weighs about 175 pounds, and he can't play the point guard position. Thankfully, the NBA has moved away from, it's become positionless basketball, basically. Now, and the Pelicans are very perfect to bring in a guy like that, where Drew Holiday can guard the team's shooting guard. You can let a guy that's built to be a shooting guard, but he's undersized, to play the number 2 on offense, but guard the opposing team's point guard. That's a big key. Another couple guys I'm looking at are a little bit lesser type of contracts it would take to sign them, but they're kind of big names, but there's also a lot of complaints, or what do you want to say, distractions surrounding them. There's Rajon Rondo, Ty Lawson. The Pelicans have said repeatedly they want to bring another ball handler next to Drew Holiday. They don't want him touching the ball, bringing it up the full time when he's out on the floor, simply because he's best reserved, kind of on the wing, saving his stamina and his aggressiveness, for about half the plays. Otherwise, he just gets worn down. Alvin Gentry's remarked on it so many times this season. So, yeah, we're kind of scraping on the bottom of the barrel, but you're looking at Ty Lawson, those type of, bottom of the barrel point guards.
Right. Anybody you can add? Anybody that you've researched you can add?
Well, another name that we haven't brought up that I think is somebody that's that one-trick pony that may have been a lot like what we saw with Nick Young's availability, and teams looking for somebody who can come off the bench and shoot. Because, again, you're thinking about your 8 or 9 man rotation just as much as who the starting 5 will be. A team that's given up. When they made the Paul George trade, you knew that it was time to move on for Indiana. Larry Bird is stepping down from his full leadership of the organization. And C.J. Miles is a heck of a shooter. Now, that may be all he can bring to the table, but he has the kind of length and the ability to knock down shots that a team that needs spacing, like the Pelicans, would very much be able to utilize. I'm a little surprised that we're not hearing more of a heated rumor mill for him. So that could be somebody that winds up being, if he's still out there in another week or two, that could be the type of guy Demps could scoop up on the cheap.
Omer Sheik, $10.2 million this year, $11.6 next year. Player option for $11.9 in 2019. Alexis Agenza, $11 million over the next 2 years, a palatable contract by NBA standards. Solomon Hill, $38 million over the next 3 years. Etuan Moore, $25 million over the next 3 years. Quincy Pondexter, $3.8 million this year, and of course hasn't played in it seems like forever. What are the chances any of those guys are utilized in a trade to be able to get those guys off the book, especially guys like Omer Sheik, who have kind of been an albatross for this team. Just doesn't fit. You got a log jam right now with Agenza, even though the contract is you could keep the contract, but yet you've got Check Diallo that's in the wings here that you want to see more time going forward next year, especially if you're going to have Davis and Cousins. Diallo would be the guy that you would think would be coming off the bench there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. There is a 50-50 chance, I'm giving it, that one of those names, at least one of those names, are going to get moved here soon, if not before the trade deadline. Now, one name that don't expect to get moved is Omer Sheik. Right. His contract is just too burdensome. In order to get rid of him off this roster, it's going to cost at least a couple of picks. Mm-hmm. And that's just too many assets to give up. Even though it's an $11 million contract, you can't do that. You're cutting yourself too much for down the road, So you can't go
stretch
that
provision
route.
there? Do you think they stretch him?
That's what I'm thinking. In about a year's time, they're going to maybe look at stretching him if they want to create some cap space, something like that. As to where what that means, the stretch is, for instance, like if they were to stretch him this summer, he's got 3 years left on his contract, and the stretch provision calls for you extend his contract and you pay it over double the amount of years and add one. So his was about $31 million, but it's actually $24 million that's guaranteed. You stretch that over 7 years. The cap hit then is divided by 7. That's about 3.5 per year. That's a lot more palatable than the 11 or so we're going to have to pay him this year.
You heard those 4 names. Any opportunity you think this team has to move those players?
Well, I know they don't want to move Diallo because his value hasn't come to the level that it could very well peak at. That very good second-round pick, maybe Frank Jackson this year, turns into another value guy that looks like he should have been a top half of the first rounder later on. So you want to keep him, and I think you almost have to in the situation they're in, unless there's a really big name and a big move to be made. You kind of have to keep both of your true centers there as backups. You're stuck with Ashik. But Agenza, I mean, he's a serviceable guy where either Davis is going to miss time because of injury, and Cousins very well could as well. And you got to have somebody who can fill that hole in certain matchups, particularly if it's several weeks at a time. You've got to have a veteran like that. And Agenza's contract really isn't that bad.
It's not bad.
Right, but in the scope of looking what you're dealing with Ashik and the fact that you're paying one big and in a year you're going to have to pay another mega money, that's going to be a problem down the road. There may not be as much movement there, and I think it's the smaller deals and the unguaranteed contracts. That's where, at this point, why it's taking so long, Demps is going to have to go.
Jude mentioned Frank Jackson, second-round pick for the Pelicans, moved up to get him. We talked a lot about him last week on the program. Stress fracture in his foot right now, not able to participate in the summer league. How much can you expect out of him this year? 19 years old, still got to grow into his body. I mean, big difference, a 19-year-old guy coming in and playing against men. Is he a guy, much like Diallo, will be back and forth in the G League this year?
Yeah, that's what I'm expecting, Eric. If we're going to be a true playoff contender all season, Frank Jackson shouldn't be seeing a lot of time. And on top of that, as you mentioned, his injury is going to hold back his development time already. Now, granted, he's a great shooter, but he's just a freshman coming out of college. So the Pelicans are probably going to take that Diallo route. Let him play, let him build up some confidence, minutes, learn the system, learn to play defense. Because his two best characteristics are scoring and shooting the deep ball. He needs to develop a lot more playmaking, I've heard, and on defense, which almost every rookie has to anyways, but especially him.
You agree with that?
That's cut and dry. That's what they have to do, and it's even more so with somebody coming off an injury because he's missing key time to gel. The summer league, those off-season workouts are going to be very important for this team to have to peak out, and he's a rookie to begin with. It's basically a lost year where he's going to spend a lot of time in the G League, and unfortunately the Pelicans don't have a team that they can control yet, so he's going to be doing the run-and-gun thing, but it's coming and would help a lot right now. But Jackson will benefit simply from playing with a higher caliber pro day in, day out.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Guys, we mentioned Quinn Cook early in the show. Let's say they can't make a deal for a point guard. Is he a viable option to run the point for this team?
I don't think so, Eric. Honestly, he doesn't have any kind of NBA experience. He's done well in all of his previous stops. He was considered one of the best veteran leaders, senior leaders in college when he was in his senior year at Duke. And he won the MVP award back in the D-League a year ago. So he's got all the stuff you look for, the accolades, the accomplishments. The thing is, this is the NBA, and he's got, maybe 300-400 minutes under his belt. Big thing, too, is he's always been more of a shooter, more of a combo guard. Even though he's technically been a point guard, I don't know if he doesn't fit in that mold of a Tim Frazier. No, that's why the Pelicans have been linked to, you've been hearing in the rumors, like the Rajon Rondos and Ty Lawsons. They know that he's not ready. The best that he can provide is be like a spark plug, off the bench, Patty Mills type. That's the most you can expect out of Quinn Cook.
Your thoughts on Cook?
That's exactly right, because he comes from that typical nowadays how guards are used on the college level and they move up. They're guys that, hey, you put the ball in the hands of the best guard you have and ask him to do a little bit of everything. And that's what Cook's game is. And he spent a lot of time in the what we knew as the D League, now the G League. Mm-hmm. And he's bounced up and down enough so he started to learn how to fit in as a bench player in the NBA. But you're talking about putting in an offense that's based more on spacing and off-the-ball movement. And here's a guy who really has to have the ball in his hands to be successful. So it's not a great situation for the Pelicans to expect a lot out of him. Spark plug, that makes a lot of sense. If he can come off the bench and help you win 2 or 3 games out of 80, that would be pretty much a big return for somebody like him.
866-3200 is the phone number if you want to get involved in tonight's show. All right, guys, as we sit here today, the absolute needs for this team going forward.
Shooting and ball handling. I think we've touched on with all the players we've listed. They do not have enough guards that provide both of those facets.
And it comes down to, I think right now, maybe the ball handling is more important, which is kind of surprising because you look at the roster, and we mentioned Cook, and we look at the fact that the not having a true ball handler who can run an offense, particularly if only one of your 2 dynamic big men is on the floor. They've got to have that. He mentioned Ty Lawson earlier along with Rondo. Rondo I'm not so sure about, but I like the fact that he has a good relationship with Cousins.
Right, and the Kentucky
and Darren Erman, don't forget.
Right.
Darren Erman and he are supposedly like this from what I've heard.
But will Rondo at this point in his career, he's got the championship pedigree, so that's not an issue. But how content will he be with limited minutes if it comes down to that based on how the roster is constructed? Versus a Ty Lawson who's grateful to be in the league. You may be just looking for a 1-year stopgap. He's got the potential to give you exactly what you need, 15 to 20 minutes a game off the bench and be a stabilizing force. Now that his life is stable after his substance abuse issues off the court, his game can come back out, which is somebody who can really settle down a team. And he's a decent defender, too, on opposing point guards.
Right. Summer League starts on Friday in Las Vegas. Any players that have a real shot of being able to make this club for the regular season?
That's a very good question. And one thing I want to bring up before we delve into that answer is there's 2-way contracts that are now available. That is going to be the key, I think, that what you want to be watching this roster over the next week and a half playing in Summer League. The Pelicans can offer now what's called a 2-way contract as to where the player that they so choose to sign to this contract is going to get paid I think 3 times the amount of what they would earn in the G League. Therefore, it's enviable for them to sign on, but the negatives are they can't be a part of the regular roster for the full season. I think they're allotted just like 40 days, something like that, with a major league team, or I should say pro NBA team. So therefore, that's going to be the biggest key to watch. I think the Pelicans already have a good idea on the guaranteed contracts, what they're going to do with them, as Quinn Cook, Axel Tupain, and Jordan Crawford, who I don't think is even going to be playing. Even though he's listed on the lineup on the roster sheet, I don't think we can expect to see him there.
What about the kid from Iowa? I asked you about him on the radio show.
Yeah, Peter Joke.
Right.
He is supposedly one of the most underrated shooters coming out, if not the most underrated shooter of all the collegians that came out this season with the draft class. This guy can absolutely shoot, and he's more than just a one-dimensional type of shooter. I looked up, and according to, I forget the name of the YouTube video I watched, but somebody studied and analyzed him, and he is one of the best catch-and-shoot three-point bombers.
I saw the video, by the way.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So he does all 3 things as to where he can create for his own shot, shoot on the move, and or just pull up in a defender's face. As we've seen, there's very few players in the NBA that can do that regularly, like Stephen Curry. How many Stephen Currys are running around? Granted, his problem is he doesn't do anything else well. He's strictly a shooter. So if he was to make a roster, he would have to be one of the best shooters in the league.
Right. Let's head to the phone lines, 866-3200 to Covington and Mike. Mike, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. How you doing, Mike?
Why is the real reason that Tom Benson won't fire Dale Demps? I mean, if this guy had a job in any other job anywhere, he'd be fired 3 times. So I'd like to know why he won't fire him. Thank you.
Great question. I wish I knew the answer to that question. Guys, you want to chime in? I mean,
No.
It's all about continuity out on Airline Drive.
No, I mean, it's obvious that we've seen many times we thought for sure, and we've had these conversations, you and I, for years. It looks like Dell Demps is on the road. Can't imagine at the end of this season he's still going to have a job. And whatever he's done magically behind the scenes doesn't measure up to the actual physical trade of getting a DeMarcus Cousins to save his skin. At least in this most recent case, hey, he pulled it off. Stick-to-itiveness paid off for him at the trade deadline last year. So that's why he has a job now. You want to go back multiple years and wonder how he survived all those storms? I have no idea. But I know why he has a job based on the most recent history. Before that, a lot of people would have been fired and probably should have.
Yeah, one thing we can say certainly, he is definitely on a hot seat this year. There's no doubt. I heard that Mickey Loomis, the guy in charge making the decisions, was kind of on the fence about what to do, with Dell Demps and Alvin Gentry before the season. What it came down to, as you touched on, Jude, it's all DeMarcus Cousins. It's that continuity. It's that we brought this guy in, all of a sudden we're going to fire and replace our general manager and head coach. And guess what? He saw that 7 years in Sacramento. No, we can't go down that road.
I get that, and I hear that argument, but look at the alternative on that. Things don't go well this year, okay? Cousins would like to stay in New Orleans. Maybe, again, him and Anthony Davis playing together. Maybe Darius Miller makes an impact. Whatever the reason is. If you have to make that move next year, then all of a sudden you're hoping that the GM and the coach that comes in can work with a DeMarcus Cousins. Whereas if you would have done it this year, if you'd have pulled the Band-Aid off this year, you'd be going in with a new system, with a new vision, with again, some fresh set of eyes on this franchise, which is one of the reasons why it was mind-boggling to me why they didn't do it this year. Again, the DeMarcus Cousins trade, I get it, okay? But at the same time, let's look at a lot of what was going on there. They surely didn't want to trade him to the Los Angeles Lakers, okay? They would have liked to have traded him to the East, but really no one in the East wanted him. So at the end of the day, it kind of fell in Dell Demps' lap. Now, again, the deal was made, gave up a pretty darn good player in Buddy Hield at this point. The rest, you would probably have to say that, Demps came out on the good end of that trade, but my gosh, you judge him off the 7 years he's been here, and then if you really want to break it down, what has he done since the power struggle with Monty Williams? And he hasn't given Alvin Gentry the players to be successful. Again, there's really been no real plan to be able to see where this franchise is going. It's been kind of like, okay, wait a minute, DeMarcus Cousins is available? We'll do this now. This player's available? We'll do this. We'll go out and we'll trade for a guy like Drew Holiday. We'll trade for Tyreek Evans. We'll bring a Ryan Anderson. Oh, wait a minute, that didn't work. These guys were injured. We're going to go in another direction. The guy has 9 lives. I don't know how in today's NBA, where again most ownership has little or no patience with a general manager or coach, how he's been able to survive. And look, at this point, let's hope that he's got a rabbit up his sleeve here, because there's not a lot of wiggle room because of the bad contracts that he's been involved in. I mentioned this as we opened up the show today. The sins of the past. The reason why you overpaid for Drew Holiday is, you've messed the cap up year after year after year by overpaying players, and you're in the situation you're in now. Guys, put me on the soapbox on that one. I'll tell you right now, I don't know why the guy's got a job. But again, I'm willing to be able to step back and see what he's going to do now with his job on the line.
Right, and he has a year, and he bought that year with the Cousins trade. It still comes back to that no matter what happened before that point. If the Cousins trade doesn't happen, he's fired. And you've got a new regime, and you've got a situation where more than likely, best case scenario, Drew Holiday signs with somebody else in a sign and trade, so you get some young talent and assets back. That's what would have happened, and you're really sitting here wondering, boy, I hope these new people in charge do a good job, because Anthony Davis can't be too happy right now. Now Anthony Davis is happy, and DeMarcus Cousins appears to be happy. And the guy who brought Cousins here to make those two guys happy needs to have his chance. He's getting 1 year, and guess what happens at the end of next year? You talk about what happens if they don't win. Demps is fired, and you're not re-signing Cousins. If they don't win, if they're not a playoff team, Cousins is going to go someplace else, and you're starting over anyway.
I do want to give just one hope. You said by going, if we went the alternate route, it might have given a chance of keeping Cousins despite a down year. I will give one name that we can have a down year with going the route we just chose. John Calipari.
My hair back.
You have to mention his name. He's the only one that the Pelicans could bring in that would keep Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins.
Hand him the keys to the castle. Say, it's yours.
That might be a plan. We don't know.
You want a dream scenario. The dream scenario is a year from now that Calipari and John Wall are now in New Orleans.
Right.
And that's when suddenly, if Drew Holiday just plays well and proves he can stay healthy, his contract's going to be a key part of making that happen, because it would have to happen in a sign and trade. So you want a dream scenario, Pelicans fans? Hope you're improved, but not improved enough, and maybe something happens on airline where they're willing to take that chance, because I believe Calipari, I believe the rumors that he was sniffing around the Knicks a few months ago.
I'll ask this question for those that may be just tuning in. How good is this team now with just an incomplete roster with their big three?
I think they're a playoff team. History's proven when you put two All-NBA players together, I don't care whether it's two bigs, you name it, they get to the postseason. The Pelicans, I know everybody keeps bringing this up, they had a losing record once Cousins came over. But you got to realize who the guy was playing next to. Hollis Thompson, Wayne Selden. They had no shooters on the floor when those two bigs were out on the floor. When they had Jordan Crawford, when they had Etwan Moore playing with Solomon Hill, Drew Holiday, Davis, and Cousins, they were world beaters. That's why the Pelicans are so interested in getting shooters. They know they can work with what they have and in the four main contracts.
Your thoughts, Jude?
Yes, if everybody stays healthy and the new system that Finch has brought in works out, then yeah, what they have right now, assuming that Dante Cunningham is retained, that could be enough. Again, everybody stays healthy and fits in nicely. That can be enough to get you to, say, 45 wins. And that could easily get you out of the 8th seed into 6 or 7. That's a reasonable thought right now. And I do believe they're going to add a veteran backup point guard and at least one more shooter that's going to help them win a few more games and give them that leeway, because guys are going to get banged up. So I think 45 wins, that kind of target, is a reasonable expectation and real progress. Over a 7-year period at this point, with Anthony Davis, as long as he's been here, that may not excite some, but remember, it's a new future now. It's the Cousins era, and that's where they need to be a year from now.
And one other thing that needs to be mentioned is the fact that the Pelicans have this big look. Nobody else is doing this in the NBA.
Right.
You're gonna, if it works, how are the teams going to be able to game plan?
Yes.
Certainly, you can't follow the Golden State Warrior model. We saw what kind of playoffs and postseason they just had.
Yes.
They ripped apart Houston, who were supposed to be contenders. That plan's not going to work for anybody. You can't combine that talent. Durant, Steph, Clay, and that bench. It's ridiculous.
Well, they're unselfish, too. That goes a long way.
Yeah, that definitely helps, but you still need the talent. That system wouldn't survive if the guys knew that the guy next to him was not going to make that shot.
Right.
But if the Pelicans can somehow make it work, if Chris Finch, Alvin Gentry put their heads together and they can build something that works, how are teams going to game plan for Davis flying around the perimeter? DeMarcus Cousins shooting threes, finding guys cutting. We saw how Denver did with a bunch of no-names last year.
Well, that's going to be my last question for you. We know what Erman does in terms of the defense. What is Finch going to do with Gentry to change this offense over?
They're going to rely, as to where Gentry promoted spacing based on just pace and movement. Chris Finch is all about movement in terms of cutting. No more standing in the corner. There's a reason why Solomon Hill and Dante Cunningham earned a nickname last year, the Corner Boys. Why? They were always standing in them.
Yes.
Chris Finch is just the opposite. If anybody ever watched any Denver Nuggets basketball last year, those guys, all of them were on the move the whole time. And that's kind of the system you need to have to make a too big, where DeMarcus Cousins is going to be occupying maybe the top of the key, Davis floating around the middle. That's the only way it's going to work. We saw how bad it was last year to close out the season. You just have three guys standing around, those two main guys on the perimeter. The offense was still bad, and people were like, but it's not working, it's not working. You just got to get the guys on the move, and I think that's what we can expect to see.
And everybody has to move, and you're fortunate that your two bigs are versatile players who can play inside and out. And I think Cousins tends to be a bit more comfortable at the top of the key, that point forward, who can set up and hit the top of the key three, as opposed to Davis, who continues to develop there. But Davis is built to be a guy who moves in the transition game as well as in the half court. Cousins is going to be healthier and in better shape to do that. So just not being so predictable in your sets is going to pay off huge dividends, I think.
Jude Young, Oleh Kosel, great hour on the Pelicans. Thanks so much for joining us on the panel tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLE at 10 p.m. You catch us tonight at 10 o'clock on Cox 130, 9 o'clock on Pelican on Friday night, and of course at 2 a.m. on Cox 130. That is Saturday mornings. Catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO. That's weekdays, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. The TuneIn Radio app is a great way to take the show with you anywhere. And of course, you can download the podcast, listen live at ericasher.com, and all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports can be seen at ericasher.com as well. Again, special thanks to our guests, Oleh Kosel and Jude Young. Also to the WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Kenny Juno, Naila Jones, Trey Lopez, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.